So recently, the Enduring Legacy just got a massive buff that has made the weapon, which was already the best LMG in the game, significantly more outstanding than it already was. And with the release of the brand new Gluttony boss, which just so happened to be an ice-based colossus, I think it's time we update my Enduring Legacy build. Recently, I faced off and absolutely destroyed Gluttony with my current build, dealing over 90 million damage in a single fight. I want to show you guys my setup for the Enduring Legacy. Let's dive right on in. So we are on the build section of the video, and quickly I want to go over the changes that happened since the last time you guys saw the video, mainly going over the base things that got buffed. So as I said in the intro, there was a big change when it comes to the Enduring Legacy, and that change is the crit damage. Basically this was 1.7 initially, and it got a pretty sizable increase to 2.3. Now that may not seem like a big increase, but that's actually pretty massive to get a crit buff that heavy. If you've seen my Enduring Legacy in the past, it had a base of 150,000 DPS, and now since the update it has a base of 173,000 DPS, which means that was a pretty significant increase. A lot of the crit damage is really weight heavy in the game, so that's really important to note. But yeah, the damage has skyrocketed. Now for those of you who are not familiar with the Enduring Legacy, I'm going to quickly go over it because I do want to give a little bit of my thoughts on it, because as you saw with the intro or the thumbnail, I'm using a blazing Enduring Legacy, which means I lean very heavy into the fire, which is actually fairly unique. I don't think I've seen anyone really lean into the fire of the weapon. I kind of want to talk about it in this video because again, it's something that's really powerful right now that most creators are not talking about. Well, none is talking about, if I'm being honest. But let's quickly talk about the Enduring Legacy's passive, and it's called Craftsmanship. What this does is basically when you set an enemy on fire, you get a bonus effect that will give you firearm attack, and then as you continue to shoot them and set them on fire, you will eventually shred their resistance, stacking it up to about over -50% whenever you get all copies of the Enduring Legacy level up. Currently, I am going to be done with the Enduring Legacy by tomorrow. All the parts are crafting right now for both set of the 2 remaining that I need, which is going to bring these stats up. What's going to change is the effective range when you add one. Is going to also increase the max stacks, and then is going to increase the firearm damage so that you can get more firearm attack. Ultimately, you end up having a pretty powerful weapon that shreds, which means, in my opinion, if you're playing the Enduring Legacy as it's meant to be, you're going to want to lean into the fire, because fire is going to give you a lot of benefit, especially considering you're going to be shredding fire resistance. Bosses like Pyro will actually have no fire resistance by the time you light him up with all these shots, and with my build that really enables it. Now one thing I did want to quickly talk about that I haven't talked about in previous videos is the stats that are based on it, like the passive stats, because I have been experimenting for the better part of the last 3 weeks, because I'm one of the few that actually started making the first video for the Enduring Legacy, because I've seen the potential of this weapon a long time ago, which is kind of crazy because they gave it a buff. I want to talk about these stats because I do have some pretty good stuff on it, but there's some things I have been testing. So some of the things that I think is mandatory on the Enduring Legacy is firearm crit hit rate and firearm crit hit damage. I really like fire attack, and it's been really powerful, especially with the blazing build that I'm doing. But I did want to say with the firearm attack, one thing that's really strange about it is that when I tested damage versus colosses, I saw better numbers overall in terms of overall DPS versus having a firearm attack percent. Now obviously things change when you're in a fight, some things vary, some things changes, but ultimately every time I've tested it consistently, I've had more damage whenever I had damage versus colosses versus having firearm attack percent. Now I obviously can't afford to keep rolling because and there's only so much I can spend resources on versus like committing to other builds. But one thing I will say is if you're using this for a bossing weapon, which you should, I think bonus versus colossus is actually a better number. It's actually better DPS than the firearm attack percent. You will have a lower DPS, but in terms of actual damage, I do believe you'll have a higher damage. This is just my experience, but yeah, just keep that in mind. Now we're gonna dive into the mod section of the video, but check this out. So as you guys know, in the first Descendant, RNG can be a little wonky to say the least, and with the Enduring Legacy getting a massive buff in the release of 2 new Ultimate Descendants and an egregiously strong boss, I think this is the perfect time to talk about today's sponsor, Player Auctions. Now, Player Auction needs very little introduction as they've been around for well over 20 years in the gaming space with arguably the biggest gaming marketplace in the business. And with the fact that a lot of comments tell me every day they struggle with farming the Enduring Legacy and defeating bosses like Frostwalker and now soon to be Gluttony, I think it's time to give player auctions a go. So let's say for example you want to get the new Gluttony boss down, and as you can see here, Jazzbuzz, a level 3 seller with well over 1,300 orders and 54 5-star reviews, is offering a run on every single platform. I see a lot of players having a hard time getting shards and mental focus, and to be quite frank, it's actually a pain farming those 5 hours a day. Fortunately, Player Auction has another trusted seller with over 8,000 orders offering services for just that. And if you're looking for a extra peace of mind, the badge here actually means that the seller had to put down a deposit of their own money before they can even start selling to you. Now, besides offering the convenience of saving you a ton of time, they actually have a solid guide section that can give you some awesome tips on how to farm Descendant. They show you where to find the best resources or just general information on the game. Time is a pretty valuable resource, so getting some players from Player Auctions to help out is actually pretty big. Check out the link in the description and the pinned comment. So now we are on the mod section of the video, and I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about the multiple builds that I have. I have a blazing build, a generic build, and a budget build, just to give you guys some extra options so that you could, in theory, have multiple builds. So we're gonna start with my blazing build. So one thing about this build that I have set up, it does lean very heavy into the fire of the ability. I think it's a massive mistake to not be at least experimenting with the fire and seeing what it has to offer. I actually ended up dropping weak point damage because from my testing, the weak point multiplier was not multiplicative. It was just a base multiplier of the 1, which it has a 1.0, and multiplied by 0.35, which was a 0.135 increase to weak point damage, which was not significant in my opinion. And so I didn't really find weak point damage to be really giving me that much compared to just having some type of elemental benefit. Also, on top of the fact that this weapon has elemental damage on it, and it works really well with fire, and it gives negative fire resistance. I felt like a lot of the builds, especially my older builds, were not really leaning into what make this weapon so strong, which is the fire enchantment on it. And so I, with this build, went into it and tried to build the build around applying the negative stacks and really taking advantage of the fire. I'm going to quickly go over the thought process behind this, but you will notice one thing very quickly here is that I have 205 rounds of bullets, and that's for a combination of reasons. One, it is because I have mental focus. Mental focus is going to give me up to 150% firearm attack as long as I'm firing within 2 seconds. We lose some fire rate, which is really unfortunate, and I do believe the weapon did get a fire rate nerf. It didn't say it in the patch notes, but I can tell from firing it, it definitely isn't firing as fast as it used to. So just be mindful of that. I can't confirm it, but seeing that I've been playing it for 3 weeks and it feels completely different, I'm pretty sure they changed something. But anyway, you do lose a little bit of firearm attack, and then you will gain 150% extra firearm attack if you get to 150 shots. Now obviously we have 205, which means we have 50 bullets. That's going to pretty much be getting 150% extra firearm damage on top of all the burn procs, which actually ends up being a ton of extra damage that actually ends up just burning enemies pretty hard, and the actual extra DPS actually adds up pretty heavily. As you can see, the enemy is burning a lot with a lot of these attacks, and the numbers are actually pretty big, and it starts to stack up to a point where the fire actually starts to really hurt. And having a boss like Gluttony come out is very perfect for this weapon because it does a lot of damage. You get a lot of sustained damage, which is actually, in my opinion, really good versus Gluttony. And then his fire, of course. In my last fight, when I actually beat him, I did 90 million damage, which is actually pretty insane considering, 90 million. I've never seen a number that big. And he has a lot of HP, so that's part of it. But ultimately, I did a lot of damage with it, and it's pretty insane that this weapon got a buff. Anyway, we do have action and reaction and rifling reinforcement. These are pretty much things you kind of expect. They won't be on every build and should be on every build, so not too much there. Because crit damage got buffed, we really want to put a lot of effort into making sure that we get crit damage, because I think the weapon leans way better into crit damage now because of the buff. And so we're using concentration priority as well as better concentration. The reload is brutal, but we have 205 rounds, and we're not really too worried about reloading because we have so many rounds in our mag, and you actually don't really feel so bad to reload. Most of the time like depending on the boss, obviously not Gluttony because that guy is insane amounts of HP. Everything else just dies in 1 or 2 mags, so it's like not really needed. Anyway, to reload, then we're using Better Insight for the crit. We're using Expanded Weapon Charge because this is giving us 49% more to our mag, which is actually pretty nice. That's why we're able to have, I believe, 171 without the other one that gives us ammo. And this is actually pretty big because, again, we're trying to get that 150 and this helps a lot. We use Fire Rate Up. As I said in previous videos, the reason why I use the blue version is because it just has more fire rate and is more important than the 2% weak point damage or the 1% crit. Those modifiers are really bad. They really need to bring those up. They're like way too weak. Even if they were additive, they would still be too weak, but they're not very good. Next we have Concentrate Support Ammo. This gives us more rounds per mag, and once again we're getting that crit hit damage because we do want to increase it because it's so valuable on this build. And then we have Firearm Enhancement, and this is what I feel is really valuable. This is going to guarantee that I proc the fire effect, and I already have fire on it base, which is going to proc it too. They're 2 different instances of fire, I believe. But anyway, this is going to easily proc the fire effect, and we get damage equal to 30% of the firearm attack. We stack a ton of firearm damage eventually to the point where we're shooting 150% firearm attack versus plus everything else. So this mod actually starts to really ramp up the fire damage and burn, starts to really burn really hard, and you start to see some crazy numbers that I don't think a lot of people realize is really good with this weapon. Now for a more generic version, I went with something like this. Rifling Reinforcement, Action and Reaction, these 2 are mandatory. Weak Point Sight, I still don't think Weak Point Sight is that great on this weapon, being having a 1.0 weak point modifier, but it does do enough that I think it may be worth it. Fire Rate Up, the DPS number, by the way, isn't representative. I can't afford to put these things in here because slots and stuff. Anyway, Expanded Weapon Charge, Better Insight, Sharp Precision Shot. The thing with Sharp Precision Shot, and the reason why I would put it in a more generic build over this one, over my other build, is because I'm not really taking advantage of, with my other build, I'm really leaning into taking advantage of the negative fire resistance, and with a more generic build, you're more leaning into just dealing raw crit. That's kind of really it. It's more of a more simple kind of build that maybe you'll use if you're just getting the Enduring Legacy. You can't like really afford to like super invest, and you want something more like simple. But for me, I feel like Sharp Precision Shot is a great option, especially considering that I'm pretty sure, I think I said this in the intro, I'm pretty sure they ninja nerfed the fire rate. It feels completely different. I've been using it for 3 weeks, so I know how the gun feels, and it's definitely firing slower naturally than what it should be. But this actually gives you a 20% fire rate. You lose 20%, and then I think it gives you 40 when you get the max stack, so you'll get 20% fire rate, which actually is pretty noticeable. The recoil is kind of wasted, and the firearm attack is maybe a little consistent, not as high as things like mental focus, but still a really great option, especially the fire rate. The fire rate actually feels really good. Of course, we're gonna go with our crit stuff, Better Insight, Better Concentration. These are things that you generally want on this. The build doesn't really change too much. A lot of times it's just swapping out 2 or 3 things. One thing that I would say though, and this is something I see a lot in other videos, is Edging Shot. The problem with Edging Shot is that it doesn't give enough crit to justify the negative fire attack. And so in my opinion, this is almost never going to be usable on most builds. I put this in my previous build, and I don't think it was good, which is why I kind of wanted to make this build on top of the update. But don't use Edging Shot. I don't think it's good. I think it needs a buff. Like, it needs to keep the crit where it's at and drop the firearm to like -7 or something. And even then, it'll still be kind of like eh. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Edging Shot. I kind of wanted to add that in. And finally, let's jump on to the budget build, and I kind of want to talk about this. The budget build is going to be very simple. You start with 2 slots. I believe it's I know this slot is here. This is the R slot, so that's why I put this here. And I put Concentration Stabilization here because, again, you may not have enough to hyper invest. So this is going to be, and you may not have enough to like change slots over. So you're going to have an R slot here. That's what it comes with. I actually obviously changed from R slot to a different slot, but I would put probably Concentration Stabilizer here because of the recoil as well as the crit hit damage, because crit hit damage is really good. you're going to want action and reaction and rifling reinforcement. As you can see, there's going to be more slots. I don't know what a budget build entails, that you're not willing to put an energy activator, or you're not willing to kata invest. So it's really hard to gauge. And I don't recall what these two are here, because you have this one and then you have another slot here somewhere. And I could have changed it from a crit slot, or it could be a M slot. I'm not sure which one it was, but you can easily put like a crit damage here, or a crit hit. Maybe a crit hit would be better. Or you can put like some form of like mental focus here, or you can put sharp precision shot in one of these slots and like really, you know, take the build to the next level. Either one will work, but from a budget build standpoint, I think these are mandatory. This has to be in here, and fire rate up has to be in it. The gun feels really terrible, and I think I said this in the last video. The gun feels really bad coming off the tamer, coming to this gun, because the fire rate is very noticeable and the stability is actually not very good. And when you have these two here where you can kind of control the recoil a little better and you have better fire rate, it doesn't feel as bad. But this is how I would go with a budget build and kind of build around there, and then maybe use either my generic build or use a blazing build if you're feeling adventurous and want to do more damage. And there you have it, guys. That is my blazing enduring legacy build. I'm going to see if the video I did where I faced off against Gluttony don't have music in it, because YouTube will copyright strike me, but I will have that at the end of the video so you guys can just see the fight. Maybe you can get some pointers and just see how the weapon performs when I'm using it on my Enzo build. Enzo build will be linked down in the description, of course. Huge thank you to Player Auction for the sponsored. Be sure to check them out. It'll be the pinned comment as well as down in the description. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video very, very soon.